The last thing Elvis said to me, I told him not to fall asleep in the bathroom, and he said, I won't. And he turned, gave me a little wave, walked into the bathroom, and I found him a little while later.
Before his sudden death, Elvis Presley revealed something so dark and mysterious that it still scares people today. Behind the fame and flashing lights, the king carried a secret that could change everything we thought we knew. What did Elvis know that got him assassinated? Why are files still hidden today? Join us as we expose the disturbing truth they don't want you to know. The King's Last Days. The summer of 1977 hung heavy over Graceland. Inside the famous White Mansion in Memphis, Elvis Presley was dying, though nobody wanted to say it out loud. The man who once made millions scream his name now spent his days sleeping until 4 in the afternoon and his nights wandering the halls like a ghost in his own home. Elvis had changed. His body had swollen from the medications that lined his bathroom counter like soldiers. His face was puffy and pale. The jumpsuits he wore on stage now needed constant alterations. But his fans still loved him. They still gathered outside the gates, hoping for just one glimpse of the king. His fiancée, Ginger Alden, tried her best to care for him. She was young and beautiful, but she seemed lost in the massive estate. The Memphis Mafia, his loyal group of friends and bodyguards, kept watch over him day and night. They had been with him for years, protecting him from the world outside. Dr. George Nicopolis, who everyone called Dr. Nick, visited regularly with prescriptions that were supposed to help Elvis sleep, help him wake up, help him perform, help him forget. But nothing could help the fear. Elvis had stopped sleeping normal hours completely. He would stay awake until dawn, reading spiritual books by lamplight. The Bible sat on his nightstand, along with texts about mysticism and the afterlife. He was searching for something, asking questions that nobody around him could answer. He talked constantly about death, about what came after, about whether he had lived the life he was meant to live. Those closest to him noticed something else too. Elvis had started keeping a journal. He would sit alone in his bedroom, writing page after page in his messy handwriting. He also recorded voice notes on a small tape recorder, speaking into it during the quiet hours when everyone else was asleep. Nobody knew exactly what he was saying. He kept it private, locked away. Then one night he pulled aside one of his most trusted friends. His hands were shaking. His voice was barely a whisper. "Something's coming for me," he said, "and when I'm gone, they'll never believe the truth." The friend asked what he meant, but Elvis just shook his head and walked away. Now, in the last weeks of his life, Elvis paced through Graceland's empty hallways after midnight. The house was silent, except for his footsteps on the thick carpet. He would stop at windows and stare out into the darkness beyond the gates. Sometimes his lips moved like he was talking to someone who wasn't there. One bodyguard swore he heard Elvis whisper the same thing over and over as he walked those halls alone. They'll never understand what really happened. But what was Elvis trying to hide? And why did he believe his time was running out? The secret files. Elvis Presley wasn't just the king of rock and roll. He had another obsession that few people understood. He was fascinated with law enforcement. His Graceland office looked like it belonged to a detective. Badges covered the walls from police departments all across America. He collected them like other people collected stamps. He would carry them in his pocket and show them to anyone who would look. But these weren't just toys to him. Elvis believed he was doing something important. The most famous badge came from President Richard Nixon himself. In 1970, Elvis flew to Washington and convinced the president to give him a federal narcotics badge. He was so proud of it that he wore it constantly. He told people it made him an official agent, though nobody was quite sure what that meant. Elvis became friends with FBI agents and police officers. He would invite them to Graceland and talk for hours about crime and justice. Some of his closest friends wondered why he cared so much. Others thought he was just playing pretend, living out some childhood fantasy. But as time went on, his interest turned into something darker. He started saying strange things. He would tell the Memphis Mafia that he knew too much about certain people. He mentioned politicians and entertainment executives by name. hinting that he had information about their secrets. When someone asked him to explain, he would just shake his head and say it was better not to talk about it. Rumors began to spread among his inner circle. Elvis supposedly kept a locked drawer in his bedroom that nobody was allowed to open. Inside, people whispered, were documents and tape recordings. Some believed these recordings contained evidence of corruption in Hollywood and even government dealings. Others thought it was all in his imagination, brought on by the substances and paranoia. But the people closest to Elvis knew he wasn't making everything up. They had seen him meeting with federal agents. They had heard him on the phone having conversations that sounded official and serious. A few even wondered if Elvis had become an informant without telling anyone. In his final weeks, Elvis became more frightened. He would look over his shoulder constantly. He stopped certain people from entering his room. At night, he would pull the curtains tight and check the locks on every door. "They're watching me," he told one bodyguard late one evening. His voice was shaking. Another time, sitting alone with a friend, he said something even more disturbing. "I've done things I can't undo." When Elvis passed away on August 16, 1977, the chaos that followed was expected. But something else happened that nobody anticipated. Several of his personal belongings vanished. The locked drawer was opened, but it was empty. The tape recordings people had whispered about were gone. Letters he had written and notes he had kept disappeared completely. Some blamed the family, others suspected the estate. But a few people believed something else entirely. They believed someone came and took those files before anyone else could see them. What did Elvis confess in his final hours? And did someone make sure his secrets passed away with him? Confession in the shadows. The night of August 15, 1977, was different from all the others. Something had changed in Elvis. He couldn't sit still. He couldn't sleep. He paced back and forth across his bedroom floor, sweating through his clothes even though the air conditioning was running. Ginger was asleep in the bed, exhausted from trying to keep up with his restless energy. But Elvis couldn't stop moving. His mind was racing. His hands were trembling. He kept looking toward the door like he expected someone to walk through it at any moment. Finally, just after midnight, he picked up the phone. He called one of his oldest friends, someone who had been with him since the very beginning. The man arrived within the hour, concerned by the panic in Elvis's voice. When he walked into the bedroom, he found Elvis sitting on the edge of the bed with his head in his hands. His eyes were red. He had been crying. "I need to tell you something," Elvis said quietly, "before it's too late." The friend sat down beside him and waited. Elvis took a deep breath, and then the words started pouring out. He talked for over an hour, his voice breaking multiple times. He said he had been living a double life, that he wasn't the person everyone thought he was, that he had made choices that haunted him every single day. He spoke about guilt that crushed him. He mentioned his mother and how he felt he had betrayed her memory. He talked about the people he trusted who had turned against him, and the people in power who had used him for their own purposes. He said he felt trapped, like he was caught in a web he couldn't escape. But then Elvis said something that made his friend's blood run cold. "They're watching everything I do," he whispered. "They know I want to talk. They'll never let me tell the truth." His friend asked who he meant by them, but Elvis just shook his head. He said some things were too dangerous to say out loud. He said if people knew what he knew, it would destroy everything. Elvis stood up and walked to the window. He pulled back the curtain slightly and looked out into the darkness beyond the gates of Graceland. For a long moment, he was silent. "Someone's going to silence me soon," he finally said. "I can feel it." His friend tried to comfort him, tried to tell him he was just tired and paranoid from the medication, but Elvis wouldn't listen. He turned around with tears streaming down his face. "Promise me you'll keep this secret," he begged. "Promise me you won't tell anyone what I said tonight." The friend promised, and he kept that promise for many years after Elvis passed away. As dawn broke over Memphis, Elvis told his friend to go home. He said he needed to rest. He hugged him tightly at the door, longer than usual, like he knew it might be the last time. A few hours later, Elvis walked into his bathroom. It was the last time anyone saw him alive. But was Elvis's death really what it seemed? Or did someone make sure the king would never speak again? The day the king passed away, August 16, 1977, started like any other day at Graceland. The sun rose over Memphis and the mansion was quiet. Ginger Alden woke up alone in the bed. Elvis wasn't beside her. She assumed he had gone to the bathroom like he always did, so she rolled over and tried to fall back asleep. But something felt wrong. Hours passed. The silence in the house felt too heavy. Finally, around 2 in the afternoon, Ginger got up and walked to the bathroom. The door was slightly open. She pushed it wider and froze. Elvis was on the floor. His body was face down on the thick carpet. His pajama bottoms were still on, but he wasn't moving. His face was pressed against the floor and his skin had turned a grayish-purple color. Ginger screamed. Within seconds, the entire house erupted into chaos. Staff members came running from every direction. Someone called for an ambulance. Others tried to lift Elvis, but his body was stiff and heavy. They rolled him over and his eyes were half open, staring at nothing. Joe Esposito, one of his closest friends, started trying to do chest compressions even though he could tell it was too late. The paramedics arrived within minutes. They rushed into the bathroom and immediately knew this wasn't good. They loaded Elvis onto a stretcher and carried him down the stairs. His arms hung limply over the sides. Staff members stood in the hallways crying, covering their mouths in shock. At Baptist Memorial Hospital, doctors worked on him for 30 minutes, but it was useless. Elvis Presley was pronounced dead at 3:30 that afternoon. The official cause was heart failure brought on by years of prescription substance misuse, but almost immediately questions began to surface. People close to Elvis noticed things that didn't add up. Pill bottles that had been in his bathroom earlier that morning were suddenly missing. The room had been cleaned before the authorities could properly investigate. Several staff members gave testimonies about what time Elvis went to the bathroom, but their stories didn't match. Some said it was early morning. Others insisted it was closer to noon. The autopsy was rushed. The toxicology reports, which would show exactly what substances were in his system, were mysteriously delayed for weeks. When they finally came back, the results were confusing and incomplete. Some doctors who saw the body said the substance levels weren't high enough to cause death. Others disagreed. Even stranger, there were whispers among the Memphis Mafia that Graceland had been quietly cleaned before investigators arrived. Rooms were tidied, personal items were removed. It was as if someone wanted to make sure certain things were never found. Several of Elvis's friends later admitted that he had been talking about his own death for weeks. He had predicted it. He told people he wouldn't live much longer. One bodyguard remembered Elvis saying just days before he passed away that it would all be over soon. He knew, the bodyguard said years later. He knew something was coming for him. By the evening of August 16th, news of Elvis's death had spread across the world. Fans began gathering outside the gates of Graceland. They held candles and cried. They sang his songs and placed flowers on the ground. Thousands of people stood in the summer heat, mourning the man who had changed music forever. But none of them knew the mystery that was unfolding inside those gates. As Elvis's body was taken away in an ambulance covered with a white sheet, the people closest to him were left with more questions than answers. How had he really passed away? Why had the scene been altered so quickly? And what had he been so afraid of in those final days? The official story was heart failure, but deep down many believed there was something more, something darker, something that was being hidden on purpose. Elvis Presley was gone. But the truth about what happened to him was only just beginning to surface, and some people would make sure it never fully came to light. But what secrets vanished with Elvis? And who made sure the world would never hear his final confession? Missing pages and lost recordings. Within hours of Elvis's death, something strange started happening at Graceland. People noticed things disappearing. The house staff had seen Elvis with a leather-bound notebook in the weeks before he passed away. He carried it everywhere. He would sit alone in his room and write in it for hours, his hand moving frantically across the pages. Some staff members had glimpsed the writing when they brought him food or medicine. The words didn't make sense to them, but they remembered certain phrases: fear, betrayal, being followed, they won't let me speak. After Elvis passed away, several people went looking for that notebook. They searched his bedroom, his office, even the bathroom where he was found. It was gone. Vanished completely. Others remembered the cassette tapes. Elvis had been recording himself late at night when he couldn't sleep. He would sit in the dark with a small tape recorder and talk into it like he was confessing to a priest. One bodyguard claimed he heard part of a recording once when Elvis left the door open. He said Elvis was talking about the music industry, about powerful people who controlled everything, about deals that destroyed souls. "They own us all," Elvis had whispered into that recorder, "and nobody can ever say it out loud." But after August 16th, those tapes disappeared too. People searched everywhere. They looked in closets, under beds, in locked drawers. Nothing. It was as if they had never existed. Vernon Presley, Elvis's father, took control of the estate immediately after his son's death. He was devastated and confused, barely able to function. Some people believed Vernon gathered up all of Elvis's personal writings and recordings and destroyed them, wanting to protect his son's image. Others thought Vernon hid them away, too afraid to let the world see what his son had been thinking in those final days. But there were darker theories too. Several members of the house staff reported seeing unfamiliar men at Graceland in the days following Elvis's death. They weren't family members or friends. They weren't police or investigators. They were strangers in plain clothes who seemed to be searching for something specific. They moved through rooms quietly, opening drawers, looking through papers, checking behind furniture. One maid said she saw two men leaving Elvis's bedroom carrying a cardboard box. When she asked what they were doing, they told her to mind her own business and walked out the front door. She never saw them again. She never found out who they were. The Memphis Mafia members who had been loyal to Elvis for decades began comparing notes. They realized that many of them had heard pieces of Elvis's confession over the years, but none of them had the full story. It was like Elvis had told each person a different part of the puzzle, making sure nobody knew everything. One friend said Elvis talked about government corruption. Another said he mentioned being used by powerful entertainment executives. A third remembered Elvis saying he had witnessed things that could destroy careers and reputations if they ever came out. But the recordings and writings that might have contained the complete truth were gone. Some people believe those materials were taken by music industry executives who feared what Elvis might have said about them. Others think the government confiscated them because Elvis had been involved in something secret and dangerous. A few even suspect that family members destroyed everything to protect Elvis's legacy. Whatever the reason, the result was the same. The full confession Elvis Presley wanted to make was erased. The truth he was desperate to tell before he passed away was silenced. Years later, a former bodyguard sat in an interview and spoke carefully about those missing materials. He said Elvis had told him something important on one of his last nights alive. He said he'd written everything down, the bodyguard recalled. Every name, every secret, every sin. He said when the time was right, the world would know, but the time never came. The interviewer asked what happened to those writings. The bodyguard just shook his head slowly. "Someone made sure we'd never find them," he said quietly. "Someone made sure Elvis's truth passed away with him." To this day, nobody knows where those notebooks and tapes ended up. They could be hidden in a vault somewhere. They could be buried in an unmarked location. Or they could have been destroyed completely, turned to ash so that no one would ever know what Elvis Presley really wanted to say. The king was gone, and his final confession went with him. But did Elvis leave behind clues? And could the truth still be hiding in plain sight? Theories and cover-ups. The moment Elvis Presley passed away, the theories began. People couldn't accept that the king had simply collapsed in his bathroom from a bad heart and too many pills. There had to be more to the story, and maybe there was. One of the most popular theories focused on the entertainment industry itself. Elvis had spent over 20 years at the top of show business. He had seen things. He had been in rooms where deals were made in whispers. Some people believe Elvis discovered dark truths about how the industry really worked, truths about exploitation, control, and the destruction of artists who didn't obey. Former associates claimed Elvis talked about contracts that trapped performers for life. He mentioned executives who treated singers like property. He hinted at a system built on greed and manipulation, where talent was squeezed dry and thrown away when it stopped making money. If Elvis had decided to expose that system, there were powerful people who would have wanted him silenced. Another theory suggested Elvis had stumbled onto substance networks operating within the music world. He knew dealers, doctors, and suppliers who provided substances to keep artists performing despite exhaustion and illness. Some believers think Elvis wanted to reveal these connections, especially the way prescription medications were handed out like candy to keep stars dependent and controllable. Dr. Nick, his own physician, had given him thousands of pills over the years. What if Elvis finally realized he was being poisoned slowly and wanted to speak out? Then there were the mob connections. Las Vegas had always been controlled by organized crime, and Elvis performed there constantly. He knew casino owners. He saw money changing hands. Some theories claim Elvis witnessed illegal activities and was warned to keep quiet. When he started talking about making a confession, the wrong people heard about it. But not all theories pointed outward. Some focused inward, on Elvis's own soul. Many people who knew him believed his confession was deeply personal. Elvis was a religious man who struggled with guilt his entire life. He felt he had sinned in ways he couldn't forgive himself for. He had cheated on his wife. He had used substances despite preaching against them. He had failed to save his mother. Perhaps his final confession wasn't about exposing others at all. Perhaps it was about admitting his own darkness and begging for forgiveness from God. Then came the more sensational ideas, the ones that refused to go no matter how many years passed. Some fans became convinced that Elvis faked his own death. They believed he knew someone was coming to assassinate him, so he staged the bathroom scene and escaped. According to this theory, his confession revealed his plan to disappear, and a few trusted friends helped him vanish forever. Sightings of Elvis popped up for decades after 1977, people swearing they saw him in airports, grocery stores, gas stations. Others tied his confession to his government connections. They claimed Elvis had been working undercover for federal agencies, gathering information on criminal organizations. His badge from President Nixon wasn't just for show, it was real. And when his cover was about to be blown, he either had to confess everything or be eliminated. Some versions of this theory suggest the government faked his death to protect him. Others suggest they took his life to protect themselves. The Presley family tried to stop the rumors. They released statements saying Elvis was simply a sick man who worked too hard and took too many medications. They said there was no conspiracy, no confession. He was just exhausted and his body gave out. They asked people to let him rest in peace. But the questions never stopped. Why were his autopsy files sealed for 50 years? Why were police reports from that day destroyed or heavily redacted? Why did certain medical records from Baptist Memorial Hospital disappear completely? If there was nothing to hide, why all the secrecy? Even the timeline of his death didn't make sense. The official story said he passed away around 2 in the afternoon, but some staff members insisted they heard him moving around hours later. Others claimed they saw lights on in his room well into the evening. Small details that didn't fit the narrative kept surfacing. Perhaps the strangest part of all the theories is what they agree on, that Elvis wanted to tell the truth before he passed away. Whether it was about the industry, the government, the mob, or his own sins, he felt an urgent need to confess. He believed time was running out. He knew something or someone was closing in. And whatever that truth was, it went to the grave with him. Or maybe it didn't. Maybe Elvis's final words, whatever they were meant to protect someone. Maybe he kept silent to save a person he loved. The legacy of a haunted king. Nearly 50 years have passed since Elvis Presley passed away, but the world still can't let him go. His music plays on radios around the globe. His movies run on television. His image appears on t-shirts, posters, and coffee mugs. He remains one of the most recognized faces in human history. But it's not just his talent that keeps people fascinated. It's a mystery. It's a tragedy. It's the haunting question of what he wanted to say before time ran out. Graceland still stands in Memphis, a monument to a king who never truly rested. Thousands of visitors walk through its rooms every year, looking at his clothes, his cars, his gold records. They stand in the jungle room where he recorded his last songs. They visit the meditation garden where his body is buried beside his mother. They feel the weight of his absence in every corner of that mansion. Elvis became more than a singer. He became a symbol. To some, he represents the American dream, the poor boy from Tupelo who became the biggest star in the world. To others, he represents the darkness of fame, the way success can hollow out a person from the inside. He was both blessed and cursed, chosen and destroyed. His faith and contradictions still fascinate millions. He read the Bible every day but took pills that took his life slowly. He believed in God but surrounded himself with excess. He wanted to help people but couldn't save himself. He was deeply spiritual yet deeply lost. These contradictions make him human in a way that pure success stories never are. And then there's the confession, the missing piece that haunts his legend. Even now, new witnesses occasionally emerge. An old friend gives an interview and mentions something Elvis said in private. A former staff member writes a memoir and includes a detail nobody heard before. A relative admits that yes, Elvis was afraid in those final weeks, and yes, he talked about secrets he wanted to reveal. Each new fragment adds to the puzzle, but the complete picture never comes into focus. It's like trying to see a painting through fog. You catch glimpses of shapes and colors, but you can never see the whole thing clearly. Maybe that's the point. Maybe Elvis's final confession wasn't meant to be a list of names or scandals. Maybe it was something deeper, something that can't be captured on a tape or written in a notebook. Maybe it was about the weight of being Elvis Presley, about carrying the dreams and expectations of millions of people while slowly losing yourself. Perhaps his confession was simply this: I'm human, I'm broken, and I need forgiveness. The guilt he carried about his mother, the fear that he had wasted the gift God gave him, the paranoia that people only loved the image, not the man, the exhaustion of pretending everything was fine when inside he was falling apart, the loneliness of being surrounded by people but feeling completely alone. These are the confessions of a haunted king, and in the end, maybe the mystery itself is the message. Maybe the fact that we're still searching for his final words 50 years later proves that truth never really fades away. Fans still gather outside those gates holding candles on the anniversary of his death. They sing his songs. They cry for a man they never met but somehow know. They feel connected to his pain, his joy, his struggle. Because Elvis wasn't just a singer. He was every person who ever felt trapped by their own life. He was every soul searching for redemption. He was every voice crying out to be heard before it's too late.